The sun was shining brightly in the sky, casting a warm glow over the small park. Mr. Johnson, an elderly black man with a gentle smile, sat on his favorite bench. He loved this park. It was his little slice of peace in a busy world. The sound of children laughing and playing filled the air, and he watched as they chased each other on the grass. This was a beautiful day, and he felt grateful for the simple joys in life. Mr. Johnson had come to this park every day for years. It was a place where he could relax and think. He would often bring a book, but today he just wanted to enjoy the sights and sounds around him. He noticed the bright colors of the flowers blooming nearby and the tall trees swaying gently in the breeze. Everything felt perfect, and he couldn't help but smile. As he sat there, he thought about his life. He had worked hard as a teacher for many years, shaping the minds of young children in his community. Even now, he could hear the echoes of their laughter and see their eager faces. Teaching had been his passion, and even in retirement, he loved sharing his wisdom with anyone who would listen. Just then, he noticed a group of kids playing soccer nearby. They were running around, shouting with excitement. Mr. Johnson chuckled softly to himself. It reminded him of when he was young, playing with his friends in the same carefree way. He wished he could join them, but his legs weren't as strong as they used to be. Instead, he sat back, enjoying the show and cheering for the kids as they scored goals. However, the peacefulness of the day was about to be disrupted. Mr. Johnson noticed a police car pulling into the parking lot. A shiny blue and white vehicle stood out against the bright green grass and colorful flowers. The officer, a young man with a serious expression, stepped out and walked towards Mr. Johnson. Mr. Johnson felt a slight twinge of unease. He had always respected the police, but he knew that sometimes people misjudged him because of his skin color. He hoped this officer would be different. "Excuse me, sir," the officer said, his tone firm but not rude. "Can I ask what you're doing here?" Mr. Johnson's heart sank. "I'm just sitting here, enjoying the day," he replied calmly. "Is there a problem?" The officer looked around, scanning the park. "Someone reported that there's a suspicious person in the area. Can you tell me why you're here?" Mr. Johnson's brow furrowed. "Suspicious? I'm just an old man enjoying my time at the park. I come here every day." The officer raised an eyebrow, his posture still tense. "I need you to leave the park. It's not safe for you to be here." Mr. Johnson couldn't believe what he was hearing. He felt anger bubbling inside him, but tried to stay calm. "I have a right to be here just like everyone else. I'm not causing any trouble," he said firmly. The officer crossed his arms and leaned in closer. "Look, sir, it's better if you just leave. I don't want to have to get more involved in this." As Mr. Johnson tried to explain himself, he could see people in the park starting to notice the scene. He felt their eyes on him, and a wave of embarrassment washed over him. Why was he being treated this way? All he wanted was to enjoy a peaceful day in the park, just like everyone else. Just a few yards away, a young woman named Lisa was jogging. She had been enjoying her run when she noticed the commotion. Curious, she slowed down and listened. As she observed the situation unfold, she felt a sense of injustice. It didn't seem right for an elderly man to be treated this way by a police officer. Lisa quickly decided to stop and watch. She couldn't believe her eyes. This wasn't the first time she had seen something like this, and it made her heart ache. She had grown up hearing stories about the mistreatment of black men by the police, and it seemed like a recurring nightmare. As Mr. Johnson stood his ground, Lisa pulled out her phone. She knew she had to capture this moment. If things escalated, there would be proof of what was happening. She started recording, her heart racing. "Why don't you just leave him alone?" Lisa called out. Her voice cut through the tension in the air. The officer turned to her, surprise flashing across his face. "This doesn't concern you," he said sharply. But Lisa was determined. "It does concern me. It concerns all of us. This is a public park, and he's not doing anything wrong." Mr. Johnson looked at Lisa, grateful for her support. He could feel the weight of the situation, But he also felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe he wasn't alone after all. As the officer hesitated, unsure of how to respond to the sudden attention, Mr. Johnson took a deep breath. He knew he had to stand up for himself. He thought about all the years he had spent teaching children about respect and fairness. It was time to show that same courage. "Sir," Mr. Johnson said, his voice steady, "I'm not a threat. I'm just a man enjoying the sunny day in the park. There is no reason for you to treat me this way." The officer looked flustered, glancing between Mr. Johnson and Lisa. The situation was tense, and everyone in the park could feel it. Would Mr. Johnson be forced to leave? Would Lisa's voice be enough to help him? The peaceful day had taken a sudden turn, and now the question lingered. What would happen next? The turning point. The tension in the park thickened, as if the air itself was holding its breath. Mr. Johnson stood firm, heart pounding in his chest. He had faced challenges throughout his life, but this moment felt different. The officer's gaze flickered between him and Lisa, clearly caught off guard by her intervention. "Just leave," the officer said, a hint of frustration creeping into his voice. "I'm trying to keep the peace here." Lisa stepped forward, her determination unwavering. "This is about more than just keeping the peace. It's about treating people with respect. Mr. Johnson has a right to be here, just like everyone else." As she spoke, several park-goers began to gather around, drawn in by the unfolding drama. Whispers spread through the crowd, and Mr. Johnson could see nods of agreement. He felt a swell of courage and gratitude. People were standing up for him. "I've lived in this neighborhood for over 30 years, Mr. Johnson said, raising his voice slightly to be heard. "I have never caused trouble, and I don't intend to start now. All I wanted was to enjoy a quiet day in the park." The officer's expression shifted. For a brief moment, he seemed uncertain. But then, as if regaining his composure, he straightened his back and crossed his arms tighter across his chest. "Look, I don't want to escalate this. Just leave the park peacefully, and we won't have any problems." Mr. Johnson took a deep breath, his eyes locked onto the officer's. "You're the one causing problems, officer. You're harassing me for no reason." Suddenly, a man in the crowd spoke up. "He's right. You're abusing your power." The voice carried weight, echoing in the now silent park. The crowd murmured in agreement, the atmosphere shifting to solidarity. The officer looked around, realizing the eyes of the community were now upon him. The power dynamic had changed. The feeling of being alone in this fight had vanished from Mr. Johnson. He was no longer just a target of harassment. He was part of something larger, a community standing together. With the crowd behind him, Mr. Johnson felt emboldened. "If you want to protect this community, you should treat us all with respect. I'm not a criminal. I'm just an old man enjoying the park." The officer shifted uncomfortably, his expression hardening again. "I'm just doing my job," he insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. The words felt empty, and even he seemed to know it. Lisa continued to film, documenting every moment. She felt a responsibility to capture the truth. The officer's authority was being challenged, and it was crucial to hold him accountable. "Officer," Lisa called out, her voice steady, "if you really believe in protecting this community, you should listen to its members instead of judging them based on stereotypes. Mr. Johnson deserves your respect, not your suspicion." The crowd began to chant softly, "Respect, respect, respect." The sound grew louder, echoing in the park. The message was clear. They would not stand by and watch an elderly man be disrespected. Seeing the tide turn, the officer's bravado began to crack. He hesitated, glancing around at the gathering crowd. There were no signs of aggression from Mr. Johnson or Lisa. Only peaceful resistance. The fear of being filmed weighed heavily on him. All right, the officer relented, holding up his hands. "I won't make you leave. Just be aware that I'm watching." He began to back away slowly, retreating towards his car. Mr. Johnson couldn't believe what he was hearing. The weight on his chest lifted slightly. "Thank you," he said, his voice steady. "I just want to enjoy my day." The crowd erupted in applause, and Mr. Johnson felt a warmth spread through him. He had faced a moment of fear and doubt, but now he was supported by his community. Lisa approached him, smiling brightly. "You did great," she said, her excitement bubbling over. "I can't believe how brave you were." Mr. Johnson chuckled, his heart swelling with pride. "It was easier with everyone here. I'm grateful for your support." The crowd began to disperse, some people offering Mr. Johnson words of encouragement as they left. He felt a sense of belonging, a reminder that he was not alone in this world. As he settled back on his bench, the peaceful atmosphere returned, although it felt different now, richer, filled with the strength of community. He could hear laughter from the kids playing again, and it warmed his heart. He turned to Lisa. "Thank you for standing up for me. It means more than you know." She nodded, her expression serious but kind. "We all need to stand up for one another. I'll always be here if you need help." As the sun began to set, casting a golden hue over the park, Mr. Johnson felt hopeful. He realized that every day could be different. Today, he had stood up for himself, and with the support of others, he had made a difference. But little did he know, this was just the beginning. The encounter would set off a chain of events that would bring unexpected surprises, and he would soon discover that standing up for oneself could lead to even greater things. What awaited Mr. Johnson and Lisa was still uncertain, but the strength of their community was undeniable. They were ready to face whatever came next, together. The following day, Mr. Johnson returned to the park, a place that had become a small sanctuary for him. The sun shone brightly, and the laughter of children filled the air. He settled on his usual bench, feeling a renewed sense of belonging. However, the events from the previous day lingered in his mind, and he found himself more vigilant than ever. As he sat quietly, watching the world around him, he spotted Lisa approaching. She waved, a bright smile lighting up her face. Mr. Johnson felt a wave of gratitude. She had stood up for him, and that meant a lot. "Hey, Mr. Johnson," she called out as she reached him. "I brought you something." She held out a small bag. "It's just a little snack for our hero." Mr. Johnson chuckled, accepting the bag. Inside were some homemade cookies and a bottle of water. "You didn't have to do this, Lisa," he said, his heart warming at the thought. "But thank you." They shared the snacks, and as they talked, the previous day's incident felt like a distant memory. Lisa shared her plans for college, and Mr. Johnson recounted stories from his youth, tales of resilience and hope. But just as they began to relax, a black SUV pulled into the park's entrance, drawing their attention. It parked nearby, and the doors swung open. Mr. Johnson felt a twinge of anxiety, wondering if the officer had returned. "Do you think it's the cop?" Lisa asked, looking concerned. "I don't know," Mr. Johnson replied, his heart racing slightly. "But let's stay calm." Two women stepped out of the SUV, both dressed in sharp professional attire. They scanned the area before approaching Mr. Johnson and Lisa. One of them, tall and confident, smiled warmly. "Hello, are you Mr. Johnson?" she asked. "Yes, I am," he replied cautiously, unsure of their intentions. "I'm Detective Harris," she introduced herself. "And this is my partner, Officer Lee. We're here to talk to you about what happened yesterday." Mr. Johnson's heart sank. "I didn't do anything wrong. I just want to enjoy my time here." Detective Harris raised her hands to calm him. "We're not here to question you, Mr. Johnson. We actually want to commend you for standing up for yourself and for others in the community." Lisa exchanged a surprised glance with Mr. Johnson, and he felt a glimmer of hope. "You mean you're not here to harass me?" he asked. "Not at all," Officer Lee said, shaking his head. "We've received a lot of calls about the incident, and we want to understand what happened from your perspective. We also want to make sure you feel safe coming to this park." Mr. Johnson was taken aback. "I appreciate that, but I'm just an old man. I don't want any trouble." Detective Harris smiled gently. "You're not just an old man, Mr. Johnson. You're a valued member of this community. Your voice matters, and we want to support you." Mr. Johnson's heart swelled with gratitude. "Thank you. That means a lot to me." The detectives sat down beside them, and for the next few minutes, Mr. Johnson recounted the events of the previous day. Lisa listened intently, chiming in when necessary. As they spoke, he felt a weight lift off his shoulders. Finally, someone was listening, and it felt good to share his side. After they finished, Detective Harris leaned forward, her expression serious. "Mr. Johnson, we're planning to increase our presence in this park. We want to ensure that everyone feels safe. If you ever experience harassment again, don't hesitate to reach out to us directly. We'll take it seriously." Officer Lee added, "And if you have any suggestions on how we can improve community relations, we're all ears." Mr. Johnson felt a surge of confidence. "I would like to see more community events here. Things that bring people together, make them feel safe. Sometimes, just knowing that someone cares can make all the difference." The detectives nodded, taking notes. "That's a great idea," Detective Harris said. "We'll make sure to consider it. You've got a voice, Mr. Johnson, and we want to hear it." As they wrapped up the conversation, Mr. Johnson couldn't help but feel a sense of hope. The visit from the detectives had opened a door he never thought would be available to him. He realized that by standing up for himself, he had ignited something larger, a movement for change. When the detectives left, Lisa turned to Mr. Johnson with a smile. "See, you're not just a victim. You're a leader." Mr. Johnson chuckled softly, the warmth spreading through him. "I never thought of myself that way." "You are," she insisted, "and together we can help this community become better for everyone." As they sat together, the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the park. Mr. Johnson felt a newfound sense of purpose. He wanted to do more, to be more involved. With Lisa by his side, he knew they could make a difference. The future was still uncertain, but he felt ready to face whatever came next. The park had become more than just a place to relax. It was a battleground for respect and dignity, and he was determined to stand his ground. A community united. As the days turned into weeks, Mr. Johnson continued to visit the park, his heart swelling with hope each time. The conversations with Detective Harris and Officer Lee lingered in his mind, fueling a desire to take action. Inspired by their support and Lisa's enthusiasm, he started planning ways to unite the community. One afternoon, as he sat on his favorite bench, he spotted Lisa approaching with a big smile on her face. "Mr. Johnson, guess what? I've got an idea." He looked up, curious. "What is it, Lisa?" "I talked to some friends at school, and they want to help organize a community picnic right here in the park," she exclaimed, her eyes shining with excitement. Mr. Johnson felt a rush of warmth. "A picnic? That sounds wonderful. It could be a great way to bring everyone together." "Yes, we can have games, music, and even a little booth where people can share their stories," Lisa suggested. "It'll be a chance for everyone to connect and enjoy the park safely." Mr. Johnson nodded enthusiastically. "Let's do it. We can invite everyone. The kids, families, even the police officers who helped us." With newfound determination, they set to work. Lisa created flyers, and Mr. Johnson distributed them in the neighborhood, sharing the news with anyone who would listen. They talked to local businesses to get donations for food and drinks, and Mr. Johnson even reached out to the detectives, who happily agreed to attend and support the event. As the day of the picnic approached, the buzz of excitement grew in the community. People began to express their interest, and a sense of unity blossomed. On the day of the event, families arrived early, bringing food, games, and laughter. Children played tag while adults set up tables and chairs under the shade of the trees. Mr. Johnson was amazed at how many people came together. He helped set up the story booth, where everyone could share their experiences and thoughts. He saw familiar faces, neighbors he had known for years, and new families he had yet to meet. It felt good to see the park filled with joy, life, and laughter. As the picnic began, Mr. Johnson stood at the front, feeling a swell of pride. Lisa took charge of the games, and soon the sound of laughter echoed throughout the park. Detective Harris and Officer Lee arrived, their presence welcomed with cheers. They mingled with the crowd, chatting and connecting with community members. Midway through the picnic, Mr. Johnson gathered everyone around. "Thank you all for coming today. This park is a special place, and it belongs to all of us. We need to make sure it remains safe and welcoming for everyone." People nodded, some clapping in agreement. He continued, "If we work together, we can make a difference. Let's stand up against harassment and help each other feel safe." Detective Harris stepped forward, her voice warm and inviting. "What Mr. Johnson says is true. We are here to protect and serve you. If you ever feel unsafe, reach out to us. We are here for you." Cheers erupted from the crowd, and a sense of camaraderie filled the air. As the picnic continued, people shared their stories in the booth, revealing struggles and triumphs. Each story helped weave a tapestry of community spirit, reminding everyone of the power of unity. The day came to a close, but the impact lingered. People exchanged numbers and made plans to meet again, solidifying new friendships. Mr. Johnson felt a wave of gratitude wash over him as he watched the smiles on everyone's faces. He never expected that standing up for himself would lead to this moment. A united community ready to support one another. As they cleaned up, Lisa approached Mr. Johnson. "We did it. This was amazing." "Yes, it was," he replied, beaming with pride. "You played a huge role in bringing everyone together." She smiled. "We can do this more often. We can keep building this community." Mr. Johnson nodded, feeling the surge of hope. "Absolutely. Together, we can make a real difference." As the sun set, casting a warm golden glow over the park, Mr. Johnson knew this was just the beginning. He had found his voice, and he was determined to help others find theirs too. The park had transformed into a safe haven, a place where everyone could come together, share their stories, and support one another. With Lisa by his side and the community behind him, he felt ready to face any challenges that lay ahead. The future was bright, and the possibilities were endless. Days turned into weeks after the picnic, and the atmosphere in the neighborhood felt lighter. The community had bonded over shared stories and laughter, and Mr. Johnson felt a renewed sense of purpose. However, one afternoon, while enjoying his usual spot at the park, something unexpected happened that would change everything. As Mr. Johnson sat reading a book, a sleek black SUV pulled up near the entrance of the park. The engine hummed quietly, and he noticed a couple of men in suits stepping out. They looked serious, scanning the area. Mr. Johnson's heart raced as he wondered what brought them here. He was familiar with the local officers, but these men were different. Lisa arrived just as the men approached him. "Mr. Johnson, who are they?" she whispered, her eyes wide with curiosity. "I'm not sure, Lisa. Let's keep an eye on them," he replied, his voice low. The men walked closer, their serious expressions making Mr. Johnson uneasy. As they reached him, one of them cleared his throat. "Mr. Johnson?" he asked, a hint of authority in his voice. "Yes, that's me," Mr. Johnson replied, sitting up straight. "We're from the Community Outreach Program," the man explained, holding out a business card. "My name is Marcus, and this is my colleague, Jacob. We've been following your efforts in the park and want to talk to you about something important." Mr. Johnson felt a mix of pride and confusion. "Following my efforts? What do you mean?" "The picnic you organized was just the beginning. Your community has shown remarkable resilience and strength. We believe there's potential for something bigger," Marcus said, his eyes bright with enthusiasm. Lisa leaned closer, intrigued. "What do you mean? What do you want to do?" "We want to help establish a community safety program," something that empowers residents to support each other and work with the police effectively. We think you'd be a great leader for this initiative, Jacob added. Mr. Johnson was taken aback. Me? Why me? Because you've shown incredible courage in standing up for your community, Marcus replied. You've brought people together and inspired them to speak out. We believe you can help create a safe environment for everyone. Mr. Johnson looked at Lisa, who nodded eagerly. He felt a sense of responsibility wash over him. Okay, I'll consider it. What would I need to do? We'd like to set up a series of meetings to discuss this further. We can provide resources, training, and support. Your community's voice is powerful, and we want to amplify it, Marcus explained. As they spoke, Mr. Johnson's heart raced with excitement and fear. This was a big step, but he felt ready to embrace the challenge. He thought about the picnic, the connections he had made, and how they could grow even stronger. I'm in, he finally said, determination filling his voice. Let's do this. Marcus and Jacob exchanged smiles, visibly relieved and pleased. Great. We'll set up a meeting next week to discuss everything in detail, Marcus said, handing him a flyer with the details. As the men left, Lisa jumped up and down, her face glowing. This is amazing, Mr. Johnson. You're going to lead the community. I'm just one part of it, Lisa. It's all of us together that can make a difference, he replied with a smile, his heart swelling with hope. Over the next few days, Mr. Johnson felt invigorated. He began to envision what the community safety program could look like. He imagined workshops where residents could learn self-defense and how to handle difficult situations. He pictured open forums where people could voice their concerns and ideas, fostering open communication with the police. At the first meeting, the atmosphere buzzed with energy. Residents filled the community center, eager to hear about the program. Mr. Johnson stood at the front, nervous but ready. He welcomed everyone and shared the vision he had in mind. Together, we can create a safer environment for our families, he began, his voice steady. This program isn't just about protection. It's about building relationships and trust within our community. He could see the excitement in their eyes. They were ready to support him. Mr. Johnson introduced Marcus and Jacob, who explained the program's objectives and how they could work together. As the discussion unfolded, people started sharing their ideas, asking questions, and volunteering to help. The energy in the room was palpable. People of all ages contributed their thoughts, showing how much they cared about their neighborhood. Mr. Johnson felt a sense of belonging he hadn't felt in years, and he knew this was just the beginning of something incredible. After the meeting, Lisa approached him, her eyes sparkling. Mr. Johnson, you did great. I can't wait to see what happens next. Thank you, Lisa. I couldn't have done it without your support. We're all in this together, he replied, feeling grateful for the young girl's enthusiasm. As the days passed, the community safety program began to take shape. The group held regular meetings, organized events, and shared resources. Mr. Johnson felt a sense of pride seeing his neighbors come together, working towards a common goal. However, he also sensed the shadows of uncertainty lurking nearby. He knew that challenges would arise, but he was ready to face them with the community by his side. The bonds they were forming were stronger than ever, and he felt a renewed sense of purpose in every step he took. As the community safety program gained momentum, the excitement was palpable. People were engaging with one another, sharing ideas, and working together to build a safer neighborhood. Mr. Johnson felt invigorated, and he was determined to keep the positive energy flowing. However, he soon realized that every good thing comes with its challenges. One afternoon, while he was at the park, he noticed a group of teenagers gathered at the playground, their voices loud and boisterous. At first, he dismissed it as normal teenage behavior, but as he got closer, he overheard some heated arguments and saw a few of them shoving each other. Mr. Johnson's heart sank. He remembered the sense of safety they were trying to establish. He walked over, hoping to diffuse the tension. "Hey, everyone, let's keep it cool. What's going on?" he asked, his voice calm yet firm. One of the teenagers, a tall boy with a baseball cap, turned to him. "Mind your business, old man. We're just having fun." Mr. Johnson took a deep breath. "I understand that, but this doesn't look like fun to me. We're trying to build a safe community. Let's talk about what's bothering you instead." The boy scoffed, but a few of the others seemed to consider Mr. Johnson's words. "You don't get it," another teen said, stepping forward. "We don't feel safe here. The cops are always breathing down our necks." Mr. Johnson nodded, recognizing the deep-seated frustrations that often festered in young people. "I understand. That's part of why we're trying to create this safety program. We want to find a way for everyone to feel safe, including you. Would you like to join us and share your thoughts?" The boys looked at each other, uncertain. One of them, a girl standing at the back, finally spoke up. "What's the point? You think some meetings will change anything?" Mr. Johnson felt a wave of determination. "Yes, they can. Change doesn't happen overnight, but if we work together, we can create something meaningful. I want your voices to be part of that change. You matter." After a moment of silence, the tall boy slowly nodded. "Fine, we'll come to one of your meetings, but if nothing changes, we're out." Mr. Johnson smiled, relieved. "That's all I ask. Thank you for being willing to give it a try." As the teens walked away, Mr. Johnson felt a mix of hope and concern. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but this was an opportunity to bridge the gap between the younger generation and the police. That evening, Mr. Johnson gathered his team for their regular meeting. He shared his encounter with the teenagers and his hopes for getting them involved. "We need to listen to them. If we can't understand their frustrations, how can we expect to find solutions?" he said, looking around the room. Marcus, the outreach program leader, nodded in agreement. "You're right. We need to create a space where they feel heard. Maybe we can host a special event just for the youth, giving them a platform to express their concerns." The group brainstormed ideas, and they settled on organizing a community forum. They would invite not only the teenagers but also police officers, allowing for an open dialogue. Mr. Johnson felt excited but apprehensive. Would the teens really show up? Would they feel safe speaking their minds? When the day of the forum arrived, the community center was buzzing with energy. Mr. Johnson stood at the front, heart racing. Would they come? As he looked out into the crowd, he saw familiar faces, families, kids, and even some of the elderly neighbors. He took a deep breath, feeling grateful for their support. To his relief, the group of teenagers arrived, led by the tall boy in the baseball cap. They entered cautiously, eyes scanning the room. Mr. Johnson welcomed them with a warm smile. "Thank you all for being here. This is a space for everyone to share their thoughts and feelings openly." As the forum began, Mr. Johnson facilitated the conversation. The police officers were present, listening intently. The teenagers started to express their frustrations, how they felt misunderstood and unfairly targeted by law enforcement. Mr. Johnson watched as the dialogue shifted from defensive to productive, with both sides slowly starting to understand each other's perspectives. "I get that you guys are trying to keep the peace, but it feels like you don't trust us," one of the girls said, her voice trembling slightly. "We're just kids, but you treat us like criminals." One of the police officers, Officer Daniels, nodded. "I appreciate you sharing that. It's not easy for us either. We want to keep you safe, but sometimes we don't know how to connect with you." The conversation flowed, with more teens and adults sharing their experiences. Mr. Johnson felt a glimmer of hope as he saw the walls starting to break down. They were all human beings with shared dreams for a better future. As the forum came to a close, the atmosphere was charged with renewed energy. The teenagers felt heard, and the police officers committed to making an effort to reach out to the youth. Mr. Johnson knew this was just the beginning of their journey toward understanding and safety. But as they wrapped up, Mr. Johnson sensed a lingering tension in the air. He knew they had made progress, but the road ahead would require more than just words. It would take action, commitment, and unwavering trust from both sides. He felt a weight settle on his shoulders, but he was ready to carry it. Together, they could build a stronger community, one conversation at a time. In the weeks following the community forum, the changes in the neighborhood were palpable. The dialogues had opened doors that once felt firmly shut. Mr. Johnson noticed that teenagers and police officers were beginning to interact more positively in the park, chatting about sports, school, and even shared hobbies. The atmosphere was shifting, and the feeling of unity was growing. Mr. Johnson decided it was time to take their efforts a step further. He wanted to solidify the relationship between the police and the community by organizing a neighborhood event, a block party that would bring everyone together in a celebration of their progress. As he made plans, he reached out to local businesses for donations. Many were eager to contribute, providing food, games, and entertainment for the event. Mr. Johnson felt excitement build as he saw the community rallying around the idea. They wanted to celebrate, to show that they were stronger together. The day of the block party arrived, and the park was transformed into a vibrant hub of activity. Colorful banners fluttered in the breeze, and the smell of grilled food filled the air. Children laughed as they played games, while adults mingled, sharing stories and laughter. Mr. Johnson walked around, greeting everyone with a smile, his heart swelling with pride. As the sun began to set, Mr. Johnson gathered everyone for a speech. He stood on a makeshift stage, looking out at the smiling faces before him. "Thank you all for coming today," he began. "This event isn't just a celebration. It's a testament to what we can achieve together. We've taken steps to build trust, understanding, and safety in our community." The crowd cheered, and Mr. Johnson could see the hope in their eyes. "Today, let's continue that journey. Let's keep the conversations going, not just today, but every day. Let's support each other, listen to each other, and remember that we are all in this together." As he finished speaking, the crowd erupted in applause. Mr. Johnson felt a rush of emotion. He had seen the community come together in ways he never thought possible. This was a place where everyone had a voice, where everyone mattered. Suddenly, as he stepped down from the stage, he noticed the group of teenagers who had first expressed their frustrations at the forum. They were gathered around Officer Daniels, laughing and sharing stories. Mr. Johnson watched, a smile creeping onto his face. This was what they had hoped for, a bridge being built between generations, between neighbors, and between those who wore uniforms and those who didn't. As the night went on, Mr. Johnson mingled with different groups, listening to their plans for the future. He heard the teenagers talking about organizing basketball games with police officers and even forming a youth council to discuss ongoing community issues. The idea that they wanted to be proactive filled him with hope. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the park lights flickered on, Mr. Johnson found himself standing next to the tall boy from the forum. "You know," the boy said, "I didn't think any of this would happen. I thought it was just going to be another boring meeting." Mr. Johnson chuckled. "Sometimes it just takes the right moment to spark change. I'm proud of you all for stepping up and being part of this." The boy smiled, a glint of determination in his eyes. "Yeah, we want to help. It's time for us to show that we care about our community." As the block party continued, Mr. Johnson took a moment to reflect. The journey they had embarked on wasn't just about creating a safe community. It was about fostering a family, a community where everyone supported one another. In the days that followed, the bond between the community and the police grew stronger. They held monthly meetings where teenagers voiced their concerns and officers listened, sharing their experiences. Together, they began initiatives to tackle issues like neighborhood safety, youth engagement, and creating mentorship programs for young people. Mr. Johnson watched as the once divided community transformed into a model of unity. It was no longer just a park where people gathered. It was a space filled with laughter, understanding, and hope. They were creating a legacy of support that would last for generations. One sunny afternoon, Mr. Johnson returned to the park, reflecting on the changes that had taken place. He saw kids playing, neighbors chatting, and officers mingling with residents. It was a sight that filled him with joy. As he sat on a bench, he noticed an elderly man approaching him. It was Mr. Thompson, the elderly neighbor who had faced harassment in the park. The man sat down beside him, his eyes sparkling with gratitude. "Thank you for what you've done, Mr. Johnson. This place feels alive again," he said. Mr. Johnson smiled warmly. "It's all of us, Mr. Thompson. Together, we've built something beautiful." As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the park, Mr. Johnson felt a sense of peace wash over him. They had turned challenges into opportunities, and together they would continue to grow and thrive as a community. And in that moment, he realized that the journey they had embarked on was far more than just a project. It was a movement of hope, unity, and love, a testament to the power of people coming together.